Well, welcome back to another episode of Winning Through Culture. I'm excited today to be here with Charlie Leichtweis. And before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about Charlie and why we asked him to join us on our Winning Through Culture podcast. So Charlie is the founder of Experts in How, LLC. They are a business consultancy firm helping businesses on the how of identifying, prioritizing, and eliminating barriers to success. Charlie is also the author of 2 books. The first one is The Power of Respect in Business and the Qlikview of Your Business. I think I may have gotten that right, Charlie, or close to it.
No, that's fine.
I know you also have your own podcast, The Power of Respect in Business, which is fantastic. I've had a chance to listen to that. So you're focused, Charlie, really on one thing, which is how to help organizations achieve sustainable, profitable growth. I would say you're unique in the world of business consultants based on what I know. And that is you're able to help businesses identify threats and barriers that are challenging them and taking your experience and knowledge and enabling teams on how to execute on solutions. Charlie's got a 30-year track record in business, including C-suite experiences across a variety of industries and businesses. He was the CEO and president of the Testor Corporation, COO of North American Wholesale Group of Blyth, Inc., CFO of McNally Book Services, and CFO and Comptroller of Rust-Oleum Corporation. His experience has really helped him be a sought-after advisor in the business world. He has served as a partner of Phoenix Strategic Advisors and managing director of Process Solutions, Inc., where he's got great experience in global strategic, operational, and financial leadership, helping drive sustainable, profitable growth for many companies. I think one of the interesting things about Charlie's experience is his experience in the international business space, including sourcing and manufacturing organizations in North America, China, Southeast Asia, and Europe, where he continues to maintain a strong network of business relationships, and also giving him a view into a little bit more global business world. His focus, like I mentioned, is again on strategy development and execution, alignment of that strategy and process around global sourcing operations, business transformation, driving growth, and creating a culture of continuous improvement. So welcome, Charlie.
Thank you, Tim. Glad to be here.
Well, it's good to have you here. When we first spoke, I was really interested in the topic of your book, The Power of Respect in Business. One could argue that our society today is lacking respect. And now I've read and shared a little bit about your bio there that I think is fantastic. And yet we're going to dive in today to this concept of respect in business and how that can help not only create a winning culture, but a more profitable business and a more sustainable business. So let's go ahead and get started. Charlie, your focus is on helping business owners learn how to identify, prioritize, and eliminate barriers to success. Without kind of giving all of your trade craft secrets away, what's kind of the roadmap for that?
Sure. Well, helping organizations with the how, as I call it, it's a process that engages associates in a way that enables them. And that's where the secret sauce of respect comes into play. At the heart of the matter for me, the leadership is an equal emphasis on results and relationships. So when you approach your organization and associates in it in a way that engages them to enable them, you're showing the respect that will indeed turn out to be an investment that pays off exponentially.
You said something there that really struck me, and that is results and relationships. And it seems too often in some businesses, the focus is only on results at the expense of relationships. And then you sometimes see cultures that are maybe overly focused in on relationship and not results. And it sounds like you're advocating a blend of those two things to really unleash the power of a culture and a profitable, sustainable business.
Well, absolutely. And when I say it's an equal emphasis, it's not 50-50, it's 100% and 100%.
Okay.
Certainly, Tim, today with the pressures on short-term results, the pressures on getting things done sooner and trying to advance your own careers or your own businesses, that focus on results becomes overbearing. And the underlying ability to achieve those results really comes through the people. And it has to be the right people. And sometimes you have the right people. And sometimes you need to develop the right people. But in either case, you have to begin to understand who they are and how to help them be successful as well. So that in turn, everyone is successful.
Yeah. And I think that, again, the focus of our podcast here, Winning Through Culture, is equipping entrepreneurs and business owners to be impactful and relevant relative to their culture. And obviously, people is a topic we discuss often. As it relates to respect, Charlie, you see that as the bedrock of tackling challenging situations. What's the advice you'd give a business owner and entrepreneur actively working on their cultures as it relates to instilling a culture of respect?
I think it starts with understanding how respect relates to relationships. So respect leads to trust is one of the keys to gaining trust. And trust is one of the keys to the ability to develop relationships. And then, as I said before, relationships then therefore are the part of the key to leadership. So when I think about it, to me, it's a method of how to be aware of myself and others and a way to be understanding how do I show them respect even when I may not agree with them or like what they're saying. So there's other techniques that go along with that help me develop relationships that are really effective, and relationships that I learn as much as teach others from my experience is how I become successful in helping them as well. So the whole idea of respect, and I'll give you an example. If I'm listening to somebody or a group of people who, as I listen, I'm thinking, well, I'm either not sure I agree with them or like what they're saying. If in the next very short period of time, I call it a nanosecond, which is not always, if I can say to myself, how can I respect these folks? It causes me to pause on going up what I call the emotional scale to frustration or anger, where I might then, not might be, but will be totally ineffective in terms of either leading them or helping them get to a better place. And I mentioned this emotional scale because that's another element of which goes hand in hand with the concept of respect. If you think about it, in my mind, everybody's on an emotional scale at any point in time, all the time. And when I talk about emotional scale, I'm not the technical guru on psychology. I'm talking about experiential one that says, okay, you feel good about what you're doing. You feel like you're making progress. Maybe that goes up to frustration. You're not sure. You're starting to doubt yourself. And then it goes to anger, perhaps. And it continues up this, what I call emotional scale, to the point where it affects your actions and reactions to others. And so I think one of the most important things is, when I think of respect, is understanding and being aware of yourself and that you are an emotional scale, being aware of others to the extent you can. That's not as easy as trying to work on yourself. And then understanding, even more importantly, what triggers your movement up and down that scale.
Let's, if we could, Charlie, for a minute. I mean, the theme of self-awareness comes up often in our podcast, and you're obviously speaking to that. I mean, what are some recommendations you have to leaders to help cultivate and develop a higher level of self-awareness?
Well, it comes through understanding yourself and being aware of the techniques. So I'll give you examples in my case. And I'm an analytical person, as you can probably tell. So when someone starts telling me there's a problem, in my mind, I know where they're going. I'm down the road. I've got this solved. And they're looking at me like, dude, you're not listening. And I'm not, even though I think I am, because I think I care. But I have to be aware of myself in that regard, that on subconsciously, or however technically you term it, I'm solving that problem because that's who I am. And I need to change that, be aware of that, change it to an extent. And it's interesting because, and this story is in my book as well, I met a gentleman, 25 years ago. His name is John. And he could walk into a room of 30 people that he would vehemently disagree with their opinions, go in that room, sit there, listen, talk with them, come out. And as soon as he left, all 30 of those people saying, when is he coming back so we can talk to him again? And I said to John, I said, you're so good at this. You're smart. I said, but I'm smart. How come I can't do that? And he said, I'll give you 2 words. And this comes into the techniques you may learn either yourself or through others. He said, listen longer. First of all, it's 2 words, which is easier for me to remember. And second of all, what happens is the person that's talking to you will believe you're listening to them. And I don't mean facetiously. They'll understand you're listening to them. And then what happens is you may find that by the time they get to where they're going with their explanation or their need, it may be different than what you thought it was originally. And therefore, if you get that far, you can be more effective understanding it better. I sort of marry that concept with a concept that I developed as well. It's called, if you're right now, you'll be right later. So you can afford to wait through that process. And don't get me wrong, it's not easy, believe me. But that's an example of a self-awareness that I had to learn myself. And then I learned a technique, quite frankly, from someone else who I respect. And that's how this process of relationships help you be better at relationships as well.
I think it's a great, the listen longer. It's the old adage of God gave us two ears and one mouth, use them in that proportion. And I love what you said about if you're right now, you're right later. I mean, I know that's a common obstacle in communication is writing yourself right out of the relationship because you want to show people you're right up front as opposed to connecting and building that trust and letting them listen. And to your point, if you listen longer, you may find out you're not right. And there's a whole nother perspective there. So you work with teams in organizations. I mean, how does this principle of respect play out in team communication?
Well, communication is one of the bedrocks or backbones of this whole process. How you communicate, who you communicate to is important, as I'm sure everybody knows. But when I think about it starts with communicating with people to engage them in the process and the problem. So in helping organizations with the how, I can start with the understanding of what are the objectives of the organization, which of course is management's responsibility to state. So that's not up for a debate per se. But the next question is what mission critical processes affect or are affected by that objective? And that begins to allow you to find out in the organization who you need to engage in order to affect change in that process. And then, of course, you go about understanding who those people are, top to bottom, not just top down, but all the way across the organization, and then bring them together. And even though people don't do this on purpose, it's hard to make sure you're communicating effectively what the objectives are to everybody, especially in extremely large organizations with multiple remote locations. So when you get them together, it's important on the communication side to clearly describe what the objectives are. And what I find is sometimes that's the first time they may have heard it that clearly. And then you ask them how what they do can affect that and what barriers do they run into trying to affect that objective. Now that they understand, they begin to determine and see how what they do affects the organization. That's the first step in connecting communication to the hearts and minds of those folks. Then, of course, the next series of questions become a classic fishbone analysis to get to the root cause. What gets in your way? What are the barriers you have to do it? Now that we all understand what we're trying to do, we understand we have a role in it. What gets in our way? And a lot of times it's still theoretical, so it has to get practical. And sometimes complaint sessions break out. And so what can happen is somebody can say, well, I can't do that because Susie doesn't give me X. So that leads to the next obvious question. Is Susie in the room and should she be? And that's the why, the fishbone analysis of why to get to root cause. But you're engaging people on the importance of what they do. You're listening to what they're saying, and you're helping them and or a group determine how to overcome or mitigate that barrier. That's the ultimate form of respect. And people will latch onto that. And the group dynamics, in my opinion, is that people will, as a group, say to themselves, we now know what we're doing and we'll work together more actively to get there. Inevitably, there's somebody that may not belong. I get that. I think that's more rare than people assume. But I think that the first step is to engage them and how what they do is important to the organization and how they can affect change to that.
Yeah, it gets back to, I guess, listening, and really the solution often lies in very people that you're trying to have get the work done. And it's just giving them the format and the structure to share their insights and to share some of the roadblocks getting in the way and then to ultimately solve for the objective you're trying to reach.
Right.
Are there any other tools, and I don't know that there need to be in that respect, Charlie, that if you're struggling to enroll people in an objective at an organizational level that you recommend people lean into?
Well, again, the first tool we talked about is understanding your place in the emotional scale. The second one was we talked about listening. I think the third thing is to be vulnerable enough, to be open enough to engage people. And I'll give you an example. And it's along the lines of communication as well, but it's along the lines of engaging. It's also along the lines of not trying to be the one who has all the answers. So when I was brought in as the CEO of the Testor Corporation, this was a company that was suffering badly. They had a series of issues financially. They had lost their 3 major retail customers in the previous 3 years before I got there. They were bleeding cash and there were other issues going on. This was a manufacturing company with a UAW union shop. And I said, okay, what we need to do here is we need to communicate with these folks as much as possible to understand what they think the issues are. And so we started quarterly all company communication meetings where we'd all get together and we scheduled it so that the 2 shifts could come, at the end of the first shift and the beginning of the second shift could get together. And it was structured to begin to talk to them about from a sales and marketing standpoint, where the company was going, what was sort of the cathedral we're trying to build here, what were some exciting things we were looking at for product development, and not in an incredible amount of detail, but to give people the understanding of where we were going. The second half of the meeting was designed and open for people to say, what were their concerns, complaints, questions, whatever. So we had the first meeting, and we got to the second half of the meeting, and I thought a riot was going to break out. People were yelling and shouting, and you don't do this, you don't do that. They were pointing to the management team, you don't do this, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, look, everybody in here has a right to ask a question, and everyone in here has a right to get an answer. You may not always like the answers, but we need to go forward with this conversation where you're asking these questions and letting it come to an answer so we can make progress going forward. And we're going to do that at the department level. I mean, my door's open, but we want to do it at the level of your activity. And when we left that meeting, the then senior management team said to me, oh boy, we better not have another one of these. But after what happened. And I said, because of what happens, exactly why we need to have these. And it's interesting. The progress we made is actually stunning. And it goes back to another aspect of when we talk about improvement, you don't always know what the speed of improvement is going to be. But I have found when you engage the people on the front line, and when it's frontline focused, and you help them understand how what they do is important, and you actually listen to and work through their questions, the speed at which change happens is exponential. I mean, instead of 6 months or a year, it's literally 2 or 3 months in many cases I can think of where I've seen it happen. So it's really an understanding of how that works. And I'm telling you, the issues we overcame with that group over time were significant.
I listened to one of your podcasts with Tony Tenero from C12, who actually introduced us, and it was about the power of respect and change management. If there's ever a time in the business cycle in our lifetimes, pace of change is really difficult to keep up with. So the power of respect is obviously very much the ability to keep moving at that pace. As you think about all the wonderful things you've learned in 30 years of business, and you've shared some great insights with us, is there anything you wish someone had shared with you early on in your leadership while you were building your leadership skills, Charlie?
Yeah, I think a number of things that I have learned, I wish somebody would. And that's my purpose here, is to share those things. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I've learned from them. And I'm hoping to share that in terms of various stories, because not every story is going to resonate with everyone, in various ways, so that maybe they can see something in their journey that they can latch onto or modify. It's even the same approach I take with clients. I'm not looking to make a living on a client. I want a client to make a living off of what I can teach them. So if someone had helped me understand Listen Longer a lot longer ago,
earlier in life,
earlier in life, there would have probably some less painful situations on the way here to here.
Probably works in marriage as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's all related. Relationships. Yeah, exactly. And I interview other people too, as well. I have, as you mentioned, I have my own podcast, the Power of Respect podcast. And in the book that I wrote, I try to get other people's opinions and stories put out there for people to listen to. Because again, it's not necessarily going to just be my stories that resonate with somebody. It could be someone else's.
Yeah, that is true. Power story. I'm curious, as you do work with many business leaders today, and certainly the world has been changing rapidly, as I mentioned earlier, the last couple of years. I mean, what are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges business leaders are facing today?
I think it comes down to them stopping to become self-aware, to understand what's going on in terms of their own personal ability to communicate with people. That aside, because there's some people that just aren't going to change, and that's okay. I mean, that's just the way it is. But on the business side of things, I think the biggest thing that the challenge for business leaders is understanding what do your customers need and how will you satisfy that need, either in what they want or how they want it could change or will change over time. Trying to anticipate that is the key. So again, coming back to, okay, I do something, whether it's a service or a product for people, and that's a need at this point in time. So understanding what the customer needs, how their needs are changing, and how they get the delivery of that need is how you anticipate when and how to pivot going forward. Whether that's an economic change, whether that's a technology change, whether that's a personal change, those are the elements, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, that foundation of self-awareness and who you are, which obviously leads you to be better equipped to understand other people. And I've heard you say earlier the importance of not only being self-aware, but taking the time to understand where people are on the emotional scale that they show up with every day and try to meet them where they are in that regard. And then this whole notion of really truly understanding what is going on in your respective industry or profession and studying that. Where is the client going? Where are the trends pointing? Whether it's in the way of technology, preferences, anything that, again, the pace moving very quickly. I mean, are there any themes? I'm curious, Charlie, you're seeing kind of independent of any industry that have emerged in the last couple of years that business leaders need to be paying more attention to, pivoting towards quickly?
Oh, that's a great question. I guess if I had a complete crystal ball, I would be famous. But seriously, I think that the rapid change of technology is certainly one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a technical person, so I don't have any greater insights into some of the veins of technology that might be out there. But clearly, when we think of how much information is available at a drop of a hat on so many different platforms, I think that the challenge is to understand, to find a way to become knowledgeable about what's out there, to be able to then try to distill it into something that makes more sense. And I'm not trying to criticize anybody, but clearly there's so many views from one extreme to the other and in the middle about every subject. It's hard for people to say, oh yeah, that makes sense, or that's what I believe in. And then they hear something else, oh, no, now I believe in that. And so I think the issue is understanding where information is, opening your mind and eyes and heart to the fact that there's multiple views of that, even if they're extreme on one side or the other. Hear what it is. You'll begin to find out, and in my opinion, whether there's any commonality. Because I think there is ultimately. You can't necessarily hear it with the noise, but if you as an individual take the time to try to view various viewpoints that aren't yours, I think are very important to begin to formulate where you can determine things are going without all the noise. Because if it's the loudest thing you think it's going to, you may find out it's not. Another example actually goes back to the gentleman I mentioned earlier, John. I said, how do you get better at listening to people you don't care what they're saying or like? And he says, you practice. And I said, well, how do you practice? And he says, find people that maybe have an opinion you don't like, or listen to a format of a view that you don't like, and really try to listen to understand what they're saying. Doesn't mean you're going to go out to dinner with them. Doesn't mean they're going to be best friends. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with them. But work on your listening skills in the face of your own frustration to really understand, because ultimately, in most anything, there really is some element or some thread or threads of common ground. And I think it's so important to work on that. And it's a lifelong journey, trust me. But it's so important to work on that. And it will also help you determine when and how to pivot. So it is related, the soft and hard side of it. It's not just data tells you where to go. It's also the other issue of the pulse of people and their thoughts.
I think the wisdom of what you just said there, Charlie, is, there is a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of information, in essence, masquerading as the truth. And if you bring it back to the whole principle of respect, which is taking the time to listen to a point of view that is not the one you share, doesn't mean you'll change your point of view, but it may make you better equipped to understand it, put you in a better position to, again, connect with that person. Again, to your point, maybe not to go out to dinner and be best friends, but to have a respectful discourse on what is, in fact, some common thread of truth in both points of view. And getting back to our humanity versus the siloed nature our society seems to be headed down.
Well, and that siloed nature gets exacerbated by the fact that I think the worst case of special interest is self-interest. And, it gets down to the individual, and there's a lot of that going around. And I think that it's important for us to try to find ways to break through that. And the point is not that everyone should agree. And the point is not that everyone should get along completely. The element is, and I say this in the book as well, if we could respect and employ these principles, I know this is true in my life, say 5% more of the time, just think how much better things could be.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about perfection, because we
won't get there.
No, you'll die trying.
In any facet of life, that will not happen.
That's right.
Including this.
Yes.
With the best of intentions. Well, the other thing I've really heard you say, Charlie, that I think is important is that it's a discipline, that you have to, in essence, train yourself to be willing to listen and to have an open mind and to understand another person's point of view. Again, not necessarily even for the purposes of agreeing, but getting back to leadership. Any leader in a company is likely going to have a very vast variety of people, backgrounds, experiences, and points of view. And finding the common thread in there is really important to create a culture of respect.
No, that's true. And I find that many times it's really the what you can probably agree on with somebody. It's usually the how where the disagreement can come. And if you start out with, I'm disagreeing when they're talking about the what, you don't even get to the how.
Never get to the how. Yeah. Yeah. No, and that is, I think, to your point, and I see this a lot, even in my own business, is if someone's not listening because they've got their own point of view and they're just waiting to share it, they're not hearing the what. It's hard to agree on what we're even trying to accomplish, which obviously dooms the how to failure.
Right.
So I am curious, in your career, what have been kind of the most influential resources for you?
Well, it's been other people. There are books about all kinds of things relative to leadership or self-help, etc. And to some extent, depending on where you are on the scale, it can be very important to you. What I find, though, is a lot of the things which describe traits or other things which I can look at and say, well, that makes sense to me. But I'm like, but how do I put that in my life? How do I make me do that or something like that? So to me, it comes down to the relationships through networking of people and getting advice like I did from John and others. And so that's really the best thing. Reach out, be not afraid, if you will, of saying, hey, how did you do that? I'd like to learn how to do that. You're sort of admitting maybe you don't know how to do it, which is okay. I don't know too many people that actually had the original thought. We seem to learn from others of what others have done and experienced. I'm sure there's the rare individual who has the original thought on something or invention, but
or thinks they have the original thought.
Or thinking, well, that's even more dangerous. So I think that we're going to learn from others, ourselves and others, and that's engaging others in this lifelong journey of how did you do that? Or what do you think about what I did? What advice would you have for me to make the next step? Don't be afraid to do that because the dividends are humongous.
Well, it sounds like the common thread for you, and I know for me and many other leaders, has been our most influential resources in life have been other people, mentors, people that have taught us, in some cases, the right way to do things or the wrong way to do things, but observing and understanding what lines up with our values and what makes sense and incorporating that into who we are and how we operate as a leader. I really appreciate the time today, Charlie. This has been insightful. Again, I think a really important topic to put out on the table for businesses is how do you cultivate a culture of respect in a society that almost seems to replicate division. And I think you've given everybody some very practical tools. We're going to put your contact information in our show notes, link to your podcast, which I would recommend people to listen to, The Power of Respect, and your book. And any final thoughts as we wrap up today, Charlie, for our audience?
I'd just like to say that the reason this is important to me is to relay stories. So I hope you heard something today that might resonate with you or trigger you to find out something more about yourself going forward. And I can't thank you enough, Tim, for having this opportunity of being with you on the show.
Well, thank you. I know I got a few nuggets and certainly listen longer is a good one because in our pressured society, we think we might know what the other person is saying.
Right.
Apt to cut them off and take a deep breath and let them go a little longer. So great advice. Well, Charlie Leichtweis, founder of Experts in How LLC, author, podcaster, thank you for being with us. We're wrapping up another episode of Winning Through Culture, helping you stay impactful and relevant. And I look forward to being with you soon again. Thank you.